World Rugby have named their Team of the Year for 2021. It's got something of a Southern Hemisphere feel to it, but there's 5 Northern Hemisphere teams who've got a player in there. We'll go over the team, see who they've picked, and we can have a quick chat about, is it right, is it wrong? Who else could they possibly have considered? I've done loads of videos about teams of the week, year, tournament and whatnot, so I kind of know how the feedback tends to go. It tends to be, I mean, most of it, to be fair, is pretty good, and I think the team they've picked is largely pretty good, actually. But you always get stuff like, what about this guy? What about the guy from my team that I like? I don't like that guy. So let's put the shoe on the other foot and do that to World Rugby for this one, eh? So who have they picked? Front row they've gone with Wynn Jones, Malcolm Marx and Tig Furlong. I think only one of the three, for mine anyway, is like out and out. Like virtually, I mean, you can argue about anything, but like Tig Furlong is you'd be hard pressed to go better than Tig Furlong. The dude scrummages and does stuff around the park. He's just phenomenal. I mean, Tupou's bloody good for the Aussies as well, but if you ask me, I think most coaches, I don't know, fans, for what it's worth, I think they're probably going to go with Furlong. Marx has been really good as well. I mean, the Springboks obviously use their front row in a slightly different way from everybody else in that their front rowers tend to play fewer minutes individually, but that means their secondary guys play more minutes than most teams. Like, you know, the Springboks tend to give virtually an even split from the starters for the bench guys, whereas other countries it tends to be an hour plus for the starter. Who else could I have maybe had at hooker? Maybe Montoya from Argentina. He's a guy who plays virtually every minute of every game. He usually goes off in the 70s and just tackles the house down and gets turnovers and whatnot. But his team's had such a bad year, it kind of reflects badly on him. Marchand for France has also been phenomenal. Wynn Jones, it's one where you probably, if you got a short memory, which most of us fans do, you're probably thinking, go, bloody hell, how did he make it? Because, again, Wales didn't end the year that well. But at the start of the year in the Six Nations, he was cracking it, man. He was in phenomenal form. Got injured on the Lions tour and maybe didn't get back to that same form. But if you look at a Team of the Year, at the start of the year, he was bloody good. I mean, Kitsoff's been good. Bai's been good for France. The All Blacks don't really have, I don't think, a prop who gets into that conversation. James Slip is pretty solid for the Aussies, but is he kind of Player of the Year material? Maybe. But I can live with Jones. I could have lived with Kitsoff. I could have lived with Bai. So, yeah, that's your kind of front rowers. Inyakane and Porter are both guys who can play both sides. So maybe get a little bit hard done by. And I noticed that, you know, because I'm doing the depth charts of all these teams as well, the Springboks tend to play a pretty steady team week in, week out. So I feel like that's conducive to picking guys for the Team of the Year because most of those guys are kind of ever present, whereas other teams which chop and change more, it's kind of harder to get a feeling for, or guys who swap positions like Inyakane and Porter, or, you know, like, I mean, Fiku's not in this team, but he's a guy who swaps positions all the time. Like, guys who chop and change, it's harder to kind of put them down in the Team of the Year because they just don't play as often. But yeah, pretty happy with the front row, to be fair. Locks, Itoje and Etzebeth, it's a bit weird because they both play 4. I know Locks, a lot of them chop and change, but Etzebeth and Itoje not really. Again, doing depth charts, that's just one thing you notice, is that these guys virtually always play on the same side when packing down at scrum time, and it's just a slightly different role. And as I said, of all the positions that you can chop and change, it's not kind of a huge deal, and heaps of guys do play both sides of it. It's not like a prop, which is kind of a whole different skill set, but Itoje and Etzebeth are by far and away 2 of the outstanding locks in World Rugby, absolutely. But they kind of play the same position. So if you want to be real picky, you could say that's a bit of a weird pick. But in terms of the quality of the players, I wouldn't argue with either of them. They're both very, very good players. Who's a better lock? I mean, Tyke Byrne's been in huge form for Ireland. James Ryan didn't make the Lions tour, but maybe he hasn't had his best year. But he's still been pretty bloody good. Maybe Burns kind of outshone him. He got on the Lions tour, and I've always liked Tyke Byrne. But Tyke Byrne's another one who floats between multiple positions, so he kind of doesn't do himself any favours in that regard. Sam Whitelock's been pretty good. But is he better than Retallick or... Not Retallick. Is he better than Itoje or Etzebeth this year? Probably not. Yeah. So, I mean, I can live with that if I'm not being picky about what jersey numbers on their back. But speaking about jersey numbers on your back, Khaleesi, Hooper, and Savia. Khaleesi is picked as 6, and I get he wears 6. But South Africans play their 6 as their open side, so they've essentially picked Hooper and Khaleesi who play exactly the same position. I think Hooper might have played a couple of minutes on the blind side from doing the Aussies depth chart, but Khaleesi I don't think has once packed down on the blind side this year for the South Africans, but he's the number 6. He's got a number 6 on his back, so I guess that's kind of good enough. And it's the same deal with Etzebeth and Itoje. It's like, did Hooper have a bloody phenomenal year? Yes. Did Khaleesi have a bloody phenomenal year? Yes. So do you want to pick them both? Yes. If you're being finicky, should you be able to pick them both? No, you should pick one or the other. So, kind of there you go. Who would you have as your blind side? I mean, Kalen Doris has been pretty good. To be fair, but he's another guy who floats between 6 and 8, doesn't he? So yeah, it's a hard one. Akira Ioane has been pretty solid for the All Blacks, but is he Player of the Year material? Don't know. So yeah, it's tough. It's tough. Savia at 8, you could have Jack Conan. He's been pretty good all year. Yeah. It's one of those ones, but it's just a weird one that they've kind of picked 2 open sides and then a number 8 who's a converted open side. So essentially 3 open sides. There you go. Who else have we got? We got Dupont at 9. I don't think there's going to be a lot of argument about Dupont at 9. I don't think so. Probably out and out one of the best players in the world and probably the best player in his position. So yeah, I can't argue with that one really. Bodhi Barrett, there'll probably be a bit of negativity around because he doesn't do the goal kicking anymore. You want your first 5 to be doing goal kicks because that gets the camera time. People love the camera time, but Bodhi doesn't kick the goals. Sometimes his tactical kickings are a wee bit off, and he doesn't maybe blast through teams with that running game that maybe he did when he was a few years younger. But I think he's been pretty good. I think the All Blacks record with him at 10 has been better than Mo'unga this year. So yeah, he's been pretty solid. I did see on social media some people saying it's got to be Intermark because it's a joke. But I mean, bro, how many games did Intermark start at 10 this year? Not many. I think he played like 1 in the Six Nations maybe because I think he was coming back from injury. It's again the short memory thing, right? You're thinking about that last All Blacks game where he set the world alight from 10. But prior to that, game before that he played 12. Game before that he played 12. Didn't go to Australia. So it'd be hard to pick Intermark at 10, but I don't know if you can base it on 1 or 2 games, maybe. But yeah, he's a bloody good player. Don't get me wrong. I mean, Quade Cooper's another one. Didn't play that many games, but he did play pretty well when he came in. So he's maybe worth a shout, but it depends. Like, what's your criteria? How many minimum games do you have to play? Or, do you have to play a minimum amount in a certain jersey number? That kind of thing. So, yeah. Speaking of guys who minimum number of games, Samu Korevia is there alongside Arm in the midfield. Korevia didn't play a heck of a lot of games, but honestly, he was genuinely, I think, the best 12 of the year from what limited amount we saw him. Now, if you think he played enough games, then yes, I think he has to be the 12. If you've got a criteria like you need to play at least, I don't know, how many games? 6? Then you probably can't go with Korevia. You maybe go with a Dale Ende or a Henshaw or something like that. But Henshaw spent time out injured as well. So, yeah. But Korevia, I mean, he had a pretty bloody good year. The Wallabies as a team just look so much better when he's playing. Lukanyo, yep. He's been pretty bloody good all year at 13. What can you say? Who else? Like I mentioned, Henshaw has been very good. But as I said, injured a wee bit. Ringrose has spent more time at 13 for the Irish, to be fair. Fiku, as I mentioned before, has had a pretty bloody good year all round. But as I said, the French chopped and changed things around as well because they didn't send their regular team to Australia. So in terms of picking a team of the year, it's hard when they chop and change that much, eh? Outside backs, they went with Mapimpi on left wing, Jordan on right wing, and Stuart Hogg at fullback. Fullback's probably the toughest one of all because Bodhi Barrett was bloody good for the All Blacks. Hugo Keenan was very consistent for Ireland. Is he Player of the Year consistent, or is consistent good enough? He's been very secure, man. The French fullbacks like Jaminet, I think Dulon, the Six Nations, so they both had their own stints. Stewart towards the end of the year for England. There's heaps of good fullbacks. So to pick Hogg across the course of the year plus the Lions is maybe a fair call. Will Jordan, breakthrough player of the year? He's been pretty good all season. I mean, Penaud's been pretty good for France. Andrew Callaway's been pretty good for the Aussies on the wing. They got Mapimpi on left wing. Duan van der Merwe's been pretty good. But I think for the most part, I'll look at this World Rugby team and go, that's a pretty bloody good choice, to be honest. They've certainly tried to spread the love around by making sure a lot of teams are represented, which I can kind of understand that, man. But I do think there's an inherent, I don't want to say easiness, but it's natural to pick guys who were ever present for their team. So it doesn't surprise me that the Springboks guys have got 5, which is a huge chunk of the side. And, for the most part, the Boks played pretty well. They won the Lions tour. They didn't do well against the Aussies away from home. And then they had a pretty good end of the year as well. All Blacks chopped and changed a lot. We've seen the Wallabies chopped and changed a fair bit. The French, certainly. Wales won the Six Nations at the start of the year, but kind of couldn't keep the form going. Ireland is maybe a bit hard done by with just Tyg Furlong. Because as I mentioned, Tyg Byrne was good all year. Henshaw was good all year. Gibson Park was cracking at the end of the year. But is he better than Dupont? No. But yeah, it's just one of those ones, man. Picking guys who play consistently in their position. Don't chop and change too much. Play pretty much week in, week out. Those are the guys you pick. So, yeah. Pretty good job, World Rugby. Still not sold about Khaleesi being a 6. I know he wears 6. But if you pick Khaleesi, I don't think you can have Hooper. I think you need to pick one or the other. There you go. That's kind of my my thoughts on that one. The locks one, they probably should have picked a different lock. Etzebeth or Itoje. I'm going to be real picky, but otherwise. Anyway, just a bit of fun, guys. You guys let me know your thoughts. Who else do you think could have been there? Any 10s that you think maybe? Because Bodhi, I think, got a bit of... Maybe because he's a Blues guy, I'm going to say he's been a bit hard done by some of his critics, but I honestly think they look better at him with the helm this year, the All Blacks, than with Mo'unga. Blues bias all day. But yeah, anyway, you guys take care, and I'll talk to you again soon. See you later.